Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. On a vast site 60 miles south of Melbourne lies a landfill. As with any dump on a large plot of land, there are towering piles of domestic waste. Birds circle over the meter-high piles while a foul smell spreads for miles around. This place is usually devoid of people. However, in May 2004, hundreds of police officers were sifting through the trash. The scene resembled something out of an apocalyptic movie, especially when investigators and police officers donned protective suits against biological hazards and ultra-durable masks to guard against asbestos-ridden dirt. The area was littered with thousands of blue trash bags. Each day of searching was incredibly challenging. They had to check every bag. This lengthy and inevitable process significantly delayed the investigation. After 3 weeks of searching, the officers were disheartened and had exhausted their moral and physical resources. On the final day, they had one last chance to find the mother and daughter. Norelle Fraser, a young woman working in the missing persons department, had put significant effort into the search from the first day, each time apprehensively beginning the inspection of a new blue bag. Around 10 a.m. on another day of searching, an excavator pulled up another batch of bags from the depths of a massive pile of garbage for inspection. Fraser noticed a blue bag stuck at the top of the bucket. As she had done hundreds of times over the past days, she paused the search to conduct a thorough examination of the excavated trash. Climbing up the pile, the woman opened the trash bag, but seeing only a kitchen glove, she signaled to continue the search. But something was off. The investigator's intuition brought her back to the bag, and when she reopened it, she saw something else. What she had mistaken for a kitchen glove was actually a bloated, decomposing human hand. She screamed aloud. She had found them. Today, let us visit the marvelous Australia, specifically Mornington Island, where despite the beauty of the surrounding nature, mild climate, and welcoming atmosphere, a nightmare akin to a horror film occurred. In May 2004, John Sharp appeared on television pleading for help. Holding a photograph, he tearfully implored anyone with information about the disappearance of his wife and daughter to contact the police and assist in their search. As it turned out, Anna Sharp and her 18-month-old daughter, Gracie, had been missing from their home since March. Let's start from the beginning and figure out who is involved in the disappearance of Anna and Gracie Sharp. We'll learn where the mother and daughter went and whether John Sharp could have really harmed his own family, or if someone else is to blame for their disappearance. Anna Kemp was born on September 27, 1962, in Dunedin, New Zealand. As an adult, she moved to Melbourne, Australia, hoping to build a career, find love, and live her best life. John Miles Sharp was born on February 28, 1967, to Valerie and Miles Sharp. The couple owned several pastry shops and lived a quiet, peaceful life in Mornington, Victoria. John grew up in a large, happy family with 4 older sisters. Later, the Sharp family welcomed another boy. John Sharp's early years were largely unremarkable. He had social issues and was heavily dependent on his parents. He had low emotional intelligence and lacked the ability to cope with stressors in his life. Sharp completed 12 grades but failed his exams. In addition to a lack of emotional intelligence and an unwillingness to face his own problems, he couldn't handle stress, so he tended to shift decisions onto others. After leaving high school, John took a job at the State Bank, where he met Anna Kemp. At the time of their meeting, Anna was 31 and John was 27. They were very different in temperament. He was always a loner and had no friends because he had been very shy since childhood and could only communicate freely with his family members. Anna, on the other hand, was cheerful, lively, and attentive to others. This greatly attracted John, and he showed her as much attention as he could afford. At first, she did not like him, but then she noticed his interest in her and saw how he opened up around her, transforming from a reserved, silent man into a confident and engaging conversationalist. Anna took notice and the young couple began dating. In October 1994, they married. The ceremony was modest and took place in a close family circle. Anna's close relatives from New Zealand also attended the wedding, but they did not share her choice, thinking that Anna was too good for him. Decorum prevented them from voicing their opinion out loud, so the parents remained silent and supported their daughter's choice. However, during the honeymoon, Anna herself began to doubt the correctness of her choice. In a phone conversation with her mother Lila, she complained that she had rushed into it and that there was no real strong love between her and John. But being a devout Catholic, she accepted her choice and decided to try to establish good family relations with her husband and become a full family. They lived together for 7 long years in various places around the Mornington coast and appeared to be a perfectly happy family. But in reality, they lived their lives separately. By the end of 2001, Anna and John learned they were expecting a child. Anna was happy as she had long dreamed of having a child, but John was opposed, as they had agreed before marriage that they would not have children. Anna disregarded John's opinion and kept the pregnancy. Thus, in August 2002, baby Gracie Louise Sharp was born. The little girl had a difficult start to life as she was born with hip dysplasia. This is a congenital malformation of the joint that is corrected by wearing a special brace for a long time. The principle of such a brace involves bending the child's legs at the knee and hip joint and holding them in such a position. Wearing the brace around the clock creates certain discomfort for sleep and full life. Such inconveniences for the little newborn girl were very difficult during the first few months of life. It was expected that this condition would not create long-term problems for Gracie, but in infancy, she felt very uncomfortable and experienced significant distress while wearing the brace. But Anna cared for her daughter with complete dedication, hoping to remove the brace as soon as possible. The girl was very weak, ate poorly, slept little, required constant attention and care. Anna's time was entirely occupied with caring for her daughter. John was dissatisfied that his wife, Anna, devoted all her time to their daughter Gracie, and their marital relationship grew increasingly tense. However, Anna was unconcerned with John's feelings, as she was fully occupied with their daughter. Even after the removal of Gracie's brace, her sleep issues worsened, prompting Anna to seek professional help. The ordeal was exhausting for her. Anna quit her job to dedicate all her time to Gracie. The Sharp family was financially well off and wanted for nothing. In previous years, John had started a company in property staging and flipping, which allowed them to build a substantial financial cushion. In late 2003, the couple bought a house on Prince Street, close to John's parents' home. Soon after moving in, Anna surprised John with news of her second pregnancy. Anna was thrilled, as she had dreamed of having 2 children. But John was very displeased with the news, and even once questioned whether the child was his. Despite their differences, their relationship appeared to be quite good. On March 21, 2004, Anna, John, and little Gracie were invited to a family celebration. They seemed perfectly happy, and none of the attendees noticed anything unusual. But 2 days later, Anna disappeared. John behaved oddly, perhaps each person grieves in their own way, but he did not report her missing to the police, nor did he look for her among friends and relatives, as if he knew where his wife was. And so it turned out. Sometime later, John confidently told Anna's mother in a phone conversation that she had run off with another man. He explained that he didn't know where she was or with whom. He also mentioned that Anna had taken her mobile phone with her. However, little Gracie stayed with John. This was most strange to Anna's relatives. They couldn't believe it, knowing that Gracie was neither needed nor of interest to John, and Anna would never have done such a thing. Anna's relatives never believed the story John told them. They knew Anna well enough to believe that she would never leave her Gracie, who still required constant care. On March 28th, John called her parents again and reported that Anna had come home by taxi and taken Gracie. He also stated that Anna would not return and that the child she was expecting was not his. This news completely dismayed the Kemp family. What John told them about Anna was not true to their daughter. But Anna's mother was adamant that her daughter would not leave the house, especially 20 weeks into her pregnancy. So who is John Sharp? A grief-stricken father and husband, or a participant in the disappearance of his own family? Over time, Anna's family received a letter via social media, stating that she had moved to another city to start a new life with a new lover, and asked not to be disturbed until she was fully settled. In the letter, she wrote that she was unhappy in her marriage to John, was tired, and wanted to start over in a new relationship. But Anna's relatives knew she would never behave like that. She would call, talk, and not hide like a fugitive. Moreover, the letter was not written in Anna's style, which cast significant doubt on whether it was actually penned by her. The fact that Anna herself wasn't answering phone calls, that she was unreachable, and the strange letter, seemingly not written by Anna herself, compelled her relatives to contact the police. Following protocol, the New Zealand police called John Sharp, but were told the same story about her leaving him for another man. There were enough suspicions to report the case to the police in Mornington, Australia, who immediately contacted John. Sharp failed to convince the police that everything was fine, and they promptly referred the case to the Victoria Missing Persons Unit. Within a few hours, an investigative team was dispatched. However, the truth is not always obvious, and the police conducted a thorough check. They visited the Sharp home, where John remained alone. John cooperated with the investigation and appeared genuinely distraught and upset. He recounted how Anna, upon leaving for the first time, got into a blue car. He reported that Anna and Gracie had moved to Chelsea. They took all their belongings and are likely now happily living their new life without him. After John's testimony, the police asked to inspect the house, and he agreed without hesitation. The first floor looked completely normal. The inspection of the second floor somewhat surprised the investigators. The main bedroom lacked a mattress, and the children's room was missing a crib. John explained that he had sold the mattress, and Anna had taken the crib to their new home. The police then checked Anna's phone. The last calls were to an insurance company, and one from an unknown number. In the first case, she wanted to add a new family member to the insurance. The unknown number turned out to be from a regular TV repairman. It turned out Anna had arranged for him to come and repair the television in their living room on March 24th, which had been broken for a long time. The police located this repairman, and he said that when he arrived for the job, John answered the door and told him that his services were not needed as the television was already working. The police also checked social networks, but Anna did not use them. Despite their efforts, the investigators found no evidence that Anna Sharp had another man in her life. John reported that Anna had come home for Gracie by taxi, but no taxi company confirmed this trip. A significant lead in the search for Anna Sharp was a bouquet of flowers she sent on her mother's birthday with a signed card. However, the words in the card did not seem like wishes from Anna, again causing her family to doubt that everything was all right with her. Bank statement details showed that the bouquet was indeed paid for with Anna Sharp's card, as there were no witnesses or evidence to support John's claim that Anna had gotten into a blue car on the purported day she left. Nor was there any evidence of bus, plane tickets, or hotel bookings. Anna's friends had absolutely no information that could confirm the story that she had run off with another man. So, what happened to Anna Sharp and her young daughter? On June 10th, John Sharp was questioned by the police again, but he stuck to his story. After the questioning, John Sharp was released. However, this was a tactical move by the investigators as they had put John under surveillance, hoping to catch any clue that could aid in the search. John Sharp was a loner who hardly made any calls and didn't entertain guests, so the investigators had undercover police follow him. During this period, John gave a memorable TV interview in which he tearfully pleaded with Anna to contact him, holding a photograph of Gracie and crying insincerely. The surveillance team continued to tail him and one day caught him in a suspicious act. After the interview, he drove to Chelsea Beach. He walked cautiously, frequently looking over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching or following him. He approached a specific bush on the shore and pulled out a white plastic bag. Taking it, he returned to his car. There, he took a phone out of the plastic bag and made a call, then drove to the nearest ATM and withdrew cash. After that, he put everything back in the bag and buried it under the bushes on the beach. All these suspicious activities were captured on video by the surveillance team. Then, John went home and called the Missing Persons Department, claiming his wife had just called him and withdrawn cash from their joint account. After obtaining video evidence of Sharp disposing of incriminating evidence in a trash bin and retrieving a credit card hidden in the plastic bag, he was arrested. During initial interrogations as a suspect, John continued to repeat his story. However, he could not explain why he buried Anna's phone and her bank card. John fell silent. The detectives knew they needed to find another way to get through to him, so they invited his parents, showed them the incriminating footage of their son on Chelsea Beach, and then sent them to talk to him. An hour later, they emerged, and Sharp was ready to talk. Initially, John Sharp stuck to his story, but eventually, he confessed to the elimination with a spear gun of 41-year-old pregnant Anna Marie Kemp Sharp and 20-month-old Gracie Louise Sharp. During press conferences with John, his parents were always present. John would interrupt the conversation and leave the room. He would feel ill. He behaved unnaturally. He would roll his eyes and cry. According to him, Anna was a tyrant with a difficult character. He decided to eliminate her to save himself. An adult man ended the life of his pregnant wife because, in his view, she stood between him and his family. But beyond his confession, the police continued to look for evidence. During further searches of the house with detection dogs in the bedroom and little Gracie's room, traces of blood were found. In the trash, they found notes where John had written everything he planned to say during interrogations. A torn photo with the name Francis was also found. Anna had hoped to name their expected son Francis. In subsequent interrogations, John Sharp detailed how he had planned the end of his pregnant wife and then his young daughter. On the evening of March 23rd, the couple argued, after which Anna went to bed but John did not. He wallowed in self-pity, believing his marriage was unhappy. It was then he decided to retrieve his spear gun from the garage. The circumstances of buying the spear gun were quite suspicious, as John Sharp had never shown any interest in spearfishing or any sport requiring such equipment. Nevertheless, he bought 2 spears for the gun using cash, leaving no trace that could prove the purchase of the weapon. While his wife slept, he loaded the gun and returned to their bedroom. John positioned the gun just inches from her left temple and fired into her skull. The shot did not instantly end Anna's life, so Sharp took the second spear and fired again. He then covered his now-deceased wife with towels to avoid looking at her face, went downstairs and slept on the couch. The next day, John Sharp woke up and went about his day as usual. He dropped his daughter Gracie off at daycare, came home, and a TV repairman visited while Anna's body still lay in the bed upstairs. After the repairman left, John tried to remove the spears stuck in his pregnant wife's head. It was a difficult task, so Sharp decided to unscrew the shafts and leave the spear tips inside Anna's skull. Then, he dug a shallow grave in the backyard and buried her, throwing her into a dirty pit. He then casually went to pick up his daughter from daycare as if nothing had happened. The deception began. John Sharp made up an elaborate story about his wife leaving him for another man and told it to his mother-in-law in New Zealand. On March 27, 2004, John put his daughter Gracie to bed. He drank several glasses of whiskey and coke. While intoxicated, he went to the garage and loaded his shotgun with a spear he had just purchased and buried the other 2 spear tips in the backyard with his wife. He then walked over to Gracie's crib and aimed the weapon at her head. Either Sharp closed his eyes or the alcohol prevented him from aiming, but the first shot penetrated Gracie's skull but did not cut off her life. She screamed in agony as the spear slammed into her head. Then he reloaded the gun and fired 2 more shots at Gracie. Amazingly, she survived. Finally, the distraught father pulled the first spear out of Gracie's skull and fired the final fatal shot. John Sharp later admitted that the moment he ended his wife's life, he knew he had to do the same to his daughter. He even took Gracie with him to the sporting goods store to buy new spears for the shotgun. The next day, Sharp covered his daughter's face with a towel because he couldn't bear to look at her dead face and removed the spears from Gracie's head. He then wrapped her in garbage bags, secured her body with duct tape, and threw his daughter into a landfill along with her toys and the weapons he used to end her life. Then, John exhumed Anna's body and dismembered it with a chainsaw. He wrapped the body parts in trash bags and secured them with tape. He then placed them in the trunk of his car and drove to the landfill. The investigators had enough evidence for an arrest, but did they have enough to charge and convict him? There was still hope that further surveillance might lead them to the bodies. However, after several days of inactivity from John Sharp, the team decided to arrest him and bring him back to the missing persons department. John Sharp's confession to the ends of his wife and daughter was just the beginning of the horror. The task of finding the bodies he dumped at the landfill like trash was daunting. Due to space constraints, bins from the Mornington City dump were transferred to another landfill. The trash bags were traced to an incident location in Turang, and thanks to meticulous waste management at the landfill, police were able to pinpoint an area of about 100 square meters where they believed the bodies would be found. This saved the team an immeasurable amount of time and effort. At the end of June, extensive searches began, and for the next 3 weeks, the police meticulously sifted through the trash at the landfill near Devil Bend Reservoir. Australian winter corresponds to summer months, and almost all 3 weeks were rainy and chilly. However, the search did not stop for a minute. For the police officers searching for the mother and daughter, this case became a personal mission. They ventured out in any weather, and on their days off, despite the challenges of working in protective suits, masks, and a daunting environment. After 19 days, Norelle Fraser discovered a bundle containing part of Anna Sharp's body. Later, photographs of Anna's mother and other personal items were found at the landfill, likely fallen out of the bag when it tore during handling. After this long-awaited discovery, Norelle Fraser shared that she would never forget the experience of finding Anna Kemp's body. She felt as if Anna was somehow calling out to her to be found. She also confessed that the initial thrill the team felt at the first discovery quickly faded with the realization that little Gracie must be nearby. By the end of July, all bags containing the remains of Anna and Gracie were found. At the trial, John Sharp confessed to the premeditated ends of Anna Kemp and Gracie. The adult man explained his act by saying his wife had been getting on his nerves. Therefore, he purchased a spear gun and practiced using it in the shed several days before the act. On the night of the act, after Anna had gone to bed, he grabbed the spear gun and fired at her head while she was asleep. He then buried her in the backyard. The next day, John Sharp went to a hardware store in Frankston and purchased a roll of duct tape, 2 polyethylene tarps, and an electric chainsaw. That same evening, after drinking heavily, he used the same spear gun to fire at his young daughter's head. Over the next few days, Sharp exhumed his wife from her shallow grave, cut her body into 3 parts, and disposed of her in the same manner as he had his daughter. He placed the body in a garbage bag and discarded it with household trash. As the charade continued, John began a thorough cleanup. He disposed of blood-stained mattresses and sent fake emails posing as Anna. He threw away Gracie's belongings and sent flowers to his mother-in-law for her birthday. In an effort to sustain his deception, John used Anna's bank card in a bank in Chelsea and even sent an email to her mother in New Zealand, pretending to be her. John Sharp appeared on television, pleading with his wife to contact him and her family to reassure them of her safety. "Anna, our marriage is over, but I still love you, and you are the mother of our wonderful daughter Gracie, whom we both adore more than anyone else." He signed a written statement to police, claiming he had nothing to do with her disappearance. John Sharp continued to lie for 3 months. However, he was no actor, and his script did not have the ending he had planned. On August 5, 2005, John Miles Sharp was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of his pregnant wife and child, with no chance of parole for 33 years. He is currently held in solitary confinement due to threats and assassination attempts by fellow inmates. John Sharp, dubbed the Mornington Monster, was sentenced in 2005 to 2 consecutive life terms and is considered the worst case of familicide in Victoria. Anna and Gracie were buried in Anna's hometown. The name of their unborn son, Francis, is inscribed on their shared headstone. In Gracie's documents, the father's name is now left blank. But did John really murder his wife because of their loveless marriage and his desire not to have another child? Or was there another motive? In addressing his dislike for his wife and child, he could have done what many in the modern world do, divorce and move on alone, but that's what any rational person would say. John Sharp, a true monster, chose to solve his problems by ending the lives of his loved ones. Amidst all the madness that had taken over his mind, it's clear that he had touch with reality. There's no other explanation. Story 2. Love can be deadly. It's often said that life really begins after 40. A wealth of life experience contributes to this. For some, maturity marks a period of gaining self-confidence because not everyone has lived their life the way they wanted. For example, some people didn't know themselves or their true desires, so they followed others' advice instead. Or they might have chosen the wrong life partner. A fear of social judgment often led to taking the path of least resistance. Sometimes with age and the realization that half of one's life has passed comes the liberation from old fears and complexes. For such individuals, turning 40 is a sort of blossoming. Once the kids are grown, they can spend more time on themselves, leave past relationships behind, and try to start new ones. Shannon Starbuck, a 42-year-old woman in our story today, believed this as well. But her new hopes did not come to fruition. On December 3, 2011, Shannon was found on the bedroom floor of her own home. She was lying on her back in a provocative pose. On her stomach was an erotic massager. It was clear that someone wanted to posthumously disgrace her. There was no doubt among the police that she had been criminally taken from life. Her body bore bruises and scrapes everywhere. Later, a medical examiner reported that some injuries were caused by the use of a stun gun. Other evidence suggested her body had been moved. However, the cause of Shannon's demise was strangulation. Detectives faced a tough task. They needed to establish the last hours of this mother of five's life and find the criminal. The disappearance of a mother of many, the police learned of the woman's lack of contact a day before the grim discovery. Initially, her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck, raised the alarm. The 47-year-old man reported he had been unable to contact his wife since December 1st. Around 3 p.m., Shannon texted her daughter that she was unable to pick up the kids from school due to feeling unwell and asked to wait for their father, whom she supposedly had informed of the change in plans. However, his phone was off, so he was unaware of the situation. Marshall and Serena, the younger brother and sister, were tired and hungry. Therefore, the 15-year-old Logan decided to call her older brother. She asked him to drive them to their father's house, located a couple of blocks from their home. Upon arrival, Austin reported that he too could not get in touch with their mother. Perhaps she had turned off her phone to rest and recover. The boy put the kids in the car and drove them to Clay's house. The man was not expecting them, but was genuinely pleased by the unexpected circumstances. After the divorce, the older children had stayed with him and the three youngest with their mother. Therefore, the father decided to enjoy their company and did not disturb Shannon. Moreover, such incidents had happened before with her. Besides, he expected to see his former wife at the school basketball game that evening, but she never showed up. On December 2nd, Mr. Starbuck drove the children to school and headed to his ex-wife's home. The front door was locked and the blinds were drawn. Since he didn't have a spare key, he tried to enter but was unsuccessful. Clay then sent a message stating that if Shannon did not show up by 7 p.m., he would contact the law enforcement. After waiting until the agreed time, he went to the police and explained the situation. 2 sheriff's deputies went to the provided address but, finding nothing suspicious, returned. The officers suggested waiting another day. If she didn't make contact by then, he should come back. Disappointed, Clay went home and waited for news. The next day, he went to the station again. Unexpectedly, they told him that his wasn't the only report. A friend and Shannon's mother had also been unable to reach her. This was uncharacteristic of her. This time, the police approached the case more responsibly. 48 hours had passed since Mrs. Starbuck's disappearance and several people were concerned. After obtaining the necessary permission, the police went to her home again. What secrets did Mrs. Starbuck's home hold? Upon arriving at the residence, officers broke the lock and entered. There were no signs of a break-in or robbery. At first glance, everything was in its place. However, the was disrupted as soon as they entered the woman's bedroom. That's where the grim truth was revealed. Shannon Starbuck hadn't just disappeared. She had been brutally ended. It appeared she had just gotten up. Her bed was unmade. The blanket lay nearby. The sheet was missing from the bed and the mattress cover was stained red. The deceased's cell phone and diary were on the dresser. Forensic experts focused their attention on her room. They examined all available surfaces for fingerprints. Some had been wiped clean, but 12 latent prints were found on the massager's box and the bathroom mirror. Numerous traces were also found in common areas. For further DNA analysis, specialists took scrapings from under the nails, face, and neck of the body. Detectives suspected that the homeowner had been deprived of life after she got out of the shower, was then moved to the bed, and eventually dragged to the floor. Notably, the removed sheets were found in the washing machine. Perhaps the perpetrator wanted to remove evidence in this way. Clay sheds light on his ex-wife's lifestyle. By noon, Clay arrived at Shannon's house. He was eager to find out what had happened. The scene in his ex-wife's yard did not inspire positive thoughts. The perimeter of the building was cordoned off with yellow tape, and an ambulance and several police cars were parked near the lawn. Mr. Starbuck was the first to be informed of the woman's tragic end. The detectives needed to gather any information about the victim and her lifestyle. Therefore, after the ex-husband managed to calm down a bit, they questioned him. He explained that they had an arrangement. Every morning he picked up the younger kids and took them to school, and she picked them up after school. However, this routine was sometimes disrupted. That happened on the morning of December 1st, when his car broke down a couple of blocks from home. Usually, waking up early, he would drive around the neighborhood and warm up the car. That time, Clay texted Shannon and asked her to take the kids to school. He then went home to wait for it to warm up. Around 11 a.m., he tried to start the car again, but once more it wouldn't start. Giving up, he went back inside to nap. Mr. Starbuck didn't notice as he slept for several hours. During that time, his cell phone died. To substantiate his claims, he showed the correspondence with his ex-wife. At first glance, everything added up. Moreover, Clay was very cooperative, handing over his cell phone, DNA material, and fingerprints. He also confessed that he had been worried about Shannon because the divorce had changed her and made her more vulnerable. When officers asked him to elaborate, he shared that, being single, the woman had registered on a dating site. As she remained attractive, she had a wide circle of admirers. According to Clay, she might have been seeing some of them simultaneously. Following his logic, one of these lovers might have sent Shannon to the afterlife. Unfortunately, he couldn't name anyone, as he didn't have such information. Throughout the conversation, Starbuck desperately cried. He explained that it was difficult for him to accept the fact of his former lover's death and to speak of her in the past tense. After recording his statement, the officers sent the man home. Poor guy had to tell the children about their mother's death. Beginning of the investigation, the case involving Shannon Starbuck's demise was gathering momentum. Investigators questioned the Starbuck family's neighbors, focusing on every detail, especially reports of unfamiliar people and vehicles in recent weeks. An autopsy confirmed a chest trauma consistent with the use of a stun gun and also revealed that she had 10 broken ribs. The injuries inflicted upon her head and body were severe and likely caused by a blunt object. The external appearance of the injuries made it difficult to determine the exact time of death. The expert estimated that her life was ended sometime between December 1st and 2. Scratches on her body suggested she had been moved. Because her neck bone was broken, the medical examiner stated that something soft was used during the act of strangulation, possibly a hand, a towel, or even a sheet. A slight clarity in the case emerged from the body samples taken, including male DNA, suggesting that the suspect might be among her close male acquaintances, starting from her ex-husband to secret admirers. Shannon's darker side. Hoping to catch his former wife's perpetrator quickly, Clay Starbuck cooperated fully with the investigation. He underwent an examination during which he agreed to document any injuries and damages. Detectives speculated that the perpetrator might also have sustained injuries during the struggle. However, no such injuries were found on Clay's hands. Following him, the 21-year-old Austin and 18-year-old Blake were also examined. Questions arose only regarding the older son, whose hands bore old cuts, but these were attributed to his job in a window manufacturing plant. During conversations with the children, some facts were established that were later clarified. Many of them knew that after the divorce, their mother often went on dates with men and did not approve of it. The teenagers had even seen explicit photos on her laptop, which led them to speculate that she might have been targeted by a predator operating online. It was clear that everyone loved their mother and were deeply shaken by her departure. However, they disagreed with the changes in her life. In a follow-up interview, Clay was more articulate. He blamed Shannon for the family discord. While he was away on business trips, she frequently saw other men. He even admitted that he suspected that Marshall might not be his son. Nevertheless, he loved him as his own. In his view, after their relationship ended, Shannon started to indulge excessively and not appropriate for her age. He disapproved of how she would drop the kids off at his place when going on another date, among other things. However, by this point, the investigators had managed not only to talk to him and the children. Having interviewed Shannon's relatives and some friends, the detectives formed their own picture of the deceased and her family. The rise and fall of the Starbuck family. Shannon was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana. She was the youngest in her family, spending her childhood with two brothers. Over time, her parents divorced and started new families, giving her additional siblings. From a young age, Shannon dreamt of creating a large and loving family of her own, a vision strengthened by her active participation in church and deep faith. She grew up modest and kind-hearted, with a passion for drawing, which earned her numerous awards and prizes. At the age of 20, she met 25-year-old Clay Starbuck. Their paths crossed in Florida, where Shannon had moved with her family in her youth. Clay, originally from Alaska, was vacationing in one of the warmer states. They met at a party hosted by mutual friends and immediately took to each other. That evening, Shannon learned a lot about Clay, including that he had continued his education at a school for diesel mechanics in Colorado after high school, then returned home to work on the Trans-Alaskan pipeline, making a good living. However, she discovered he was already married and had two beautiful children from that union. Shannon was not deterred by his complicated past. In fact, she saw it as a positive, believing that it gave him valuable experience for married life. The couple married soon after. The newly minted Mrs. Starbuck moved in with her husband, initially struggling to adapt to the new environment and weather but quickly settling in. However, married life wasn't as idyllic as Shannon had hoped, with Clay often away, leaving her to manage the household alone. Yet love gave her strength, knowing that his work shifts would eventually end and he would be back by her side. Meanwhile, she embraced motherhood with his children from his first marriage. It wasn't long before they had their own children together, first a son named Austin, and 3 years later, a brother for him named Blake. In 1996, their family grew again with the birth of a much-awaited daughter, Logan. But with Logan came challenges. She was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at a young age. Shannon embraced her daughter's diagnosis with grace and became her best friend. Later, another daughter brightened the Starbucks life, whom Clay named Serena. Shannon devoted her time to her children, overseeing their health, education, and church teachings. She was known throughout the community for her hobbies, cooking, and crafts. Yet she was so immersed in her role as a caring mother and loving wife that she didn't notice when her husband began an affair at work. This was a tremendous shock to her, perceived as a deep betrayal. Consequently, in 2000, she filed for divorce, marking a new chapter in her life. Still harboring feelings for her ex-husband, she decided to move to Arizona to dull the pain of their painful separation by starting a relationship with another man. However, this attempt failed as Shannon realized she still loved Clay, who was also reaching out, asking her to return. Convinced he had repented, she gave him a second chance. In 2001, the couple welcomed their son Marshall, their fifth child. Yet, instead of solidifying their marriage, he became a new point of contention. Even a remarriage in 2006 could not save their fractured relationship. Awakening 6 months later, they moved to Deer Park in Spokane County, Washington. Clay found a suitable house for their large family. He continued to work at his previous job, so he was away most of the time. Shannon, left to manage the household and kids on her own, took them to movies, theaters, and parks, and organized home parties. However, doubts and distrust poisoned their marriage, further impacted by the long separations and breaks in their relationship. Ultimately, in 2010, the couple permanently separated. Crossing into her 40s, Shannon began to rebuild her life, holding on to hope that she might still experience the joy of love. She resolved never to give up or repeat past mistakes. Even when Clay suffered a serious injury, she chose not to return to him. Nonetheless, she supported her ex-husband and provided whatever help she could. In February 2011, Clay left his job and settled permanently in Deer Park, staying close not just to his children, but to Shannon as well. He still hoped she would return, but she did not share his view, and finally finding freedom, she enjoyed it. After undergoing surgery, Austin and Blake moved in with their father, happy to be away from under their mother's constant supervision. Shannon, breathing new life, found a part-time job and enrolled in a dental assistant course. Tired of being a housewife and needing to support her family, especially as her ex-husband stopped paying child support due to his illness, she still had him nearby for emergencies. The children stayed with him after school every Wednesday, as well as the second and fourth weekends of the month. That summer, Shannon proudly received her certification, marking off one dream and starting to pursue another. Hoping to meet a worthy man, she created a profile on a dating site, feeling a keen need to live for herself. She also regretted spending her best years on a man who did not appreciate her and was capable of deceit. However, a criminal plan one December morning ended her dreams. Shannon Starbuck's funeral took place on December 10, 2011. The large number of people who came to the service testified to her being a bright and sincere person. She found her final resting place at a cemetery in Orlando. Search for the culprit. Public attention to the woman's death spurred law enforcement to move quickly. While focusing on her ex-husband, detectives decided to verify his alibi. As a result, they retraced Clay's movements on December 1st. He once again explained what had happened that morning and detailed where and how his car had broken down. Additionally, the results of the initial examination came in. Starbuck's fingerprints did not match any found at the crime scene. This led to a decision to check him against existing databases while also focusing on Shannon's mobile phone, laptop, and personal diary. At the same time, they explored the possibility of other people being involved in the crime. After carefully examining Mrs. Starbuck's mobile phone, detectives added several names to the list of suspects. Men she had communicated with on the dating site raised suspicions. One, Tom Walker, had scheduled a date with her on December 5th. Hours before her demise, they had candid conversations and exchanged photos. Tom had asked Shannon to take a photo using an adult toy, which she refused. Notably, her body was later found in the exact pose mentioned by Tom. Within an hour, Walker was located. He was shocked not only by the news, but also by being considered a suspect. He immediately explained his activities on the day of her death, which were confirmed by colleagues in surveillance cameras. Next on the list was John Wilson, who had scheduled a meeting with Shannon on December 1st. From their correspondence, it was clear he was not looking for a serious relationship. Their interaction was merely casual. It also turned out that the suitor had used a fake name. His real name was John Kinlane. He worked in a completely different field than he had claimed and was married, hence the secrecy. On the day of the crime, Shannon postponed their morning meeting to a later time, citing headaches. Eventually, the date did not take place. After taking a DNA sample from him, he was released. His alibi was corroborated, even as his deception was revealed to his family. Critical evidence. After these developments, the investigation reverted to square one. While examining Shannon's mobile phone, detectives made a request to the cellular service provider, uncovering another significant detail. It turned out that a 911 call was made from the victim's phone at 9:18 a.m. on the morning of December 1st, but the suspect deleted it from the call log. Thanks to a request to the emergency services, the 30-second call was retrieved. Unfortunately, it contained nothing but sobs and rustling sounds before abruptly cutting off. It was also discovered that after the failed call, The call center operator tried to return the call, but it went to voicemail. According to GPS data, Shannon's mobile device was located at her home, pinpointing the exact date of her demise. She had been deprived of life after dropping her kids at school and returning home. This meant that the 11 messages sent afterward were not sent by her. The suspect tried to confuse the investigation. Moreover, he was close to the Starbuck family, as he used a nickname for the youngest son, calling him Marsh in the correspondence. After this information, Clay's statements underwent further scrutiny. He had sufficient motive for ending his ex-wife's life, divorce. Not all partners accept new realities with dignity. Moreover, he had a perfect opportunity, knowing her daily routine. Thus, authorities decided to again track the suspect's car route, this time using street surveillance camera recordings. This is where officers' suspicions took shape. Starbuck's car had not broken down. Concurrently, results from another analysis arrived. DNA material collected from Shannon's body matched the suspect's samples exactly. Harsh reprisal. The scenario unfolded as follows. On the morning of December 1st, Clay sent a message to his ex-wife, asking her to take the kids to school, fabricating a car breakdown. While she was out, he entered the house and waited. During this time, he accessed her unprotected laptop and found personal correspondences that infuriated the already jealous Starbuck. When Shannon returned, a heated argument ensued, which ultimately led to bloodshed. This explained the unusual pose in which the deceased was found, an act of vengeance for her newfound freedom. Afterward, Clay stayed in the house, impersonating her in text exchanges. His intentions to harm his ex-wife might have been long-standing. Now, a friend's words to detectives took on new meaning. During a conversation, she mentioned that Clay and Shannon's relationship was far from what it seemed. Shannon had confessed in candid conversations that she was tired of his constant control and criticisms. Daring to divorce, she feared he might harm her someday. From June to November 2011, she had repeatedly contacted the police, claiming her ex-husband was stalking her. She felt unsafe even in her own home, hence did not trust anyone with the keys. Ultimately, she managed to secure a restraining order against Clay, so their communications were confined to text messages. Careful examination of Mrs. Starbuck's diary made it evident that she not only feared her former lover, but believed he was turning the children against her. He concocted vile stories and portrayed her as promiscuous. Thus, the children's reaction to their father's arrest on February 6, 2012, was not surprising. They refused to believe in his involvement. They were not perturbed by the fact that a tracking program was found on their mother's laptop and a hard drive labeled Shannon's desktop computer in their father's house, along with printed correspondences. The older children doubted the authenticity of the DNA analysis, believing the accusation against their father was far-fetched and the case fabricated. However, the views of law enforcement and other relatives differed. Triumph of truth and justice at the trial, the prosecution was confident in the man's guilt, supported by a substantial amount of physical evidence and testimonies. In June 2013, justice prevailed. Clay Starbuck was found guilty of first-degree deprivation of life under aggravating circumstances and disrespect to human remains. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2015, Clay's attorney filed an appeal against the verdict, but it was rejected. To this day, the perpetrator remains behind bars at the Airway Heights Corrections Center in Spokane County. Shannon's relatives mourn the woman's untimely departure profoundly. Yet, their hearts are even more shattered by the thought that the children sided with their father. He was so obsessed with his ex-wife that in seeking revenge, he forgot about the consequences. Unable to accept his new reality, he left his children effectively orphaned. Story 3. In various popular romantic comedies, it's not uncommon to see the protagonist pursuing and literally stalking the girl he likes. And in the end, she gives in under his insistence, realizes that no one loves her the way he does, and reciprocates his feelings. On screen, this looks cute and funny, and the guy comes off as a true romantic, willing to do anything to win the attention and love of his chosen one. However, in real life, this doesn't work at all the same way, and such behavior can not only repel a person but also force them to call the police. Celeste Mano's story began quite harmlessly. She was receiving attentions from a work colleague, which she consistently ignored. She sincerely hoped that her admirer would soon understand and just leave her alone. However, just one careless action by Celeste drastically changed the situation, turning the suitor into an obsessed pursuer, and another thoughtless act led to irreversible consequences. The young woman was genuinely fearful for her life, repeatedly sought police assistance, and confessed to friends that she sensed trouble but felt powerless and unsupported by anyone. It's likely the tragedy could have been avoided had law enforcement not operated on the principle of come to us when the crime has been committed. Now, let's carefully examine this case and trace the chain of events that led to the tragic demise of this beautiful young woman. Who was Celeste Mano? Celeste Christa Mano was born on November 30th, 1997, in the northeastern part of Melbourne, in the Australian state of Victoria. She was the youngest of two children to parents Eggy DeMoro and Tony Mano. She grew up alongside her older brother named Alessandro. According to some information, the family patriarch left his wife when the children were still small and soon remarried, but he always maintained contact with his older offspring, supported them financially, and tried to be actively involved in their lives. During her school years, Celeste was quite sociable, active, and friendly. She engaged in sports and dance, served as the captain of the cheerleading team, and had big plans for her future. Initially, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer and enrolled in the prestigious University of Melbourne, where she studied criminal and civil law. However, towards the end of her studies, she decided law was dull, started studying advertising and marketing, and in 2018 was hired by a large and rapidly growing company that sold various goods on e-commerce platforms. Smart and talented, Celeste quickly grasped everything on the fly, successfully fulfilled her duties, and rapidly ascended the career ladder. She went from a simple call center worker to the head of an entire department in less than a couple of years, and was considered one of the most promising employees. Everyone admired her intelligence, initiative, and ability to organize work rationally and competently. Moreover, Celeste possessed outstanding external attributes and a flawless figure. During her university years, she even participated in the university beauty contest and was among the top 3 leaders. She always had a multitude of admirers, so from a young age, she was used to significant male attention but was very meticulous in choosing partners. The persistent colleague alongside Mano, a certain Louis Nader Sacco, worked at the company. He was nearly 16 years older than her and showed a lively interest in the new, beautiful hire from the very first days she appeared in the office. It's worth noting that Louis was quite reserved and unsociable and evidently lacked any career ambitions, as he had long occupied the same minor position without any desire for development. Kind, smiling, and open, Celeste did not want to hurt Louis's feelings, so she always politely declined whenever he tried to ask her out. However, the man repeatedly tried to draw her attention in various ways. Sometimes Celeste would make jokes to lighten the mood, but she was firm in her desire to have nothing to do with him. Louis interpreted this situation as a challenge or a game. He thought that his young boss was simply playing hard to get and decided that he would win her over no matter what. His attentions were very persistent, awkward, and simply annoying, but Celeste tried to keep her composure and hoped that he would soon give up or shift his attention to someone else. As time passed, Sacco remained relentless. He became literally obsessed with the young beauty, and everyone around noticed it. One day, Mano confided in a close friend and colleague that she would never even consider a relationship with Louis. First, he was odd and entirely unpredictable. Second, she was never attracted to men without ambitions and life goals. Third, the significant age difference also played a role. However, she felt pity for her admirer, as despite all his efforts, he stood no chance. A fatal mistake in his fruitless attempts to win the attention and affection of his colleague, Louis completely forgot about his own work duties. He had never been a particularly diligent worker, but now he simply stopped performing his direct functions. His productivity plummeted, and the senior management was dissatisfied with the situation. Sacco received 3 reprimands and warnings, and in early autumn of 2019, the negligent worker was finally dismissed. Louis was very upset by this turn of events, and as he packed his things in the office, it seemed as though he was about to cry. Celeste, meanwhile, experienced mixed feelings. On one hand, she was relieved that the annoying suitor would finally disappear from her life and stop bothering her with his persistent overtures. On the other hand, she felt some guilt, believing that this had happened partly because of her. Mano, as a department manager, thanked the dismissed employee for his years of service, escorted him to the building exit, and on parting, tried to encourage him by patting him on the shoulder and sincerely wishing him luck. However, it soon turned out that this harmless act was a fatal mistake, and a catalyst that fueled Louis's belief that they could make it work. Instantly, the man decided that Celeste was simply afraid to start an office romance as she was his boss, and it could lead to general disapproval and negatively affect her career. Now, in his view, nothing stood in the way of their happiness, and they could be together. Overwhelmed by his feelings, Louis unexpectedly kissed Celeste on the cheek. An awkward pause followed. Stunned by his audacity, Mano was at a loss for how to react, so she simply turned around and hurried back into the office building without saying a word. This reaction convinced Sacco once and for all that Celeste had feelings for him, and he should not give up. The relentless stalker, a few days after being fired, Louis created a social media account, located Celeste's profile, and sent her a friend request. Initially, she accepted it, thinking there was no harm. But when he began bombarding her with requests to meet and go out together, she tried to politely decline at first, and then simply blocked him. The next day, the former colleague sent her another friend request from a newly created profile. Celeste tried to ignore it, but he started commenting on her photos, praising her looks and figure, and noting how great a couple they would make. She then tried to adjust her profile settings so that no one except friends could send her messages, comment on her photos, or posts. A week later, during a family celebration, she complained to her relatives about the persistent pursuer, also recounting that bizarre incident on the day he was fired. Her family listened, but at that time everyone assumed it was not serious, and the unwanted admirer would soon lose interest and disappear from her life forever. Louis didn't have Celeste's personal phone number. During their work together, they only communicated through work channels. But now she began receiving strange romantic messages from an unknown number, and she immediately guessed who they were from. The admirer sent her romantic poems he had written, admired her beauty, and again tried to coax her into going out. Mano answered the stalker's call only once, attempting to have serious conversation with him to explain that nothing could happen between them and to persuade him to stop pursuing her. However, the man did not listen, and only repeated how pleasant her voice was and how glad he was that she had finally picked up the phone. After this, she tried to block the pursuer, but he called each time from a new number. Eventually, she decided to change her number, but within a week, Louis somehow found it out, and the telephone harassment continued. Seeking protection for about half a year, Celeste unsuccessfully tried to ignore the crazed admirer. She blocked his numbers and fake social media pages, did not respond to messages, and tried to live her usual life. However, the stream of messages continued, and their nature gradually changed from romantic to bold and threatening. Now the man did not ask. He demanded to meet with her and began detailing his delusional, intimate fantasies about what he would do with her right now. But that was not even the worst of it. It turned out the stalker began following her from work to home, learning where she lived. Celeste didn't realize at first that Louis was now present in her life not just in messages, but was literally trailing her every move. She occasionally glimpsed him near her home, but each time convinced herself it was her imagination, a product of nerves. When the young woman finally realized that she was not mistaken, and that Sacco, with his maniacal obsession, was indeed following her, she decided to seek police protection. Mano wanted the law enforcement to issue a special order prohibiting the stalker from approaching her and her home. However, the officers were indifferent to her request, if not outright mocking. According to the police, the man had done nothing illegal or reprehensible, as writing poems or expressing explicit fantasies in text messages is not forbidden and is not punishable. Celeste could not provide evidence that Louis was following her and lurking near her home. so she was simply asked to leave the precinct and not hinder the police from catching real criminals. The long-awaited restraining order. For another 6 months, Celeste continued to suffer from the relentless harassment of her former colleague. During workdays, she frequently noticed his car parked across the street from her office, and in the evenings he would drive past her house several times. She constantly felt his gaze, which made her nervous and live in constant tension. In August 2020, Mano approached the police again, this time providing photo and video evidence on her phone that Lewis was indeed following her. A different officer took her statement, who took the situation more seriously and was even surprised at his colleague's indifference. He advised her to immediately go to court, where a restraining order was issued against Sacco, and he was notified that he could no longer call or approach her or try to contact her in any other way. Clearly, the man did not expect this turn of events, and he indeed disappeared from Celeste's sight for a few weeks. She was happy. For the first time in a long time, she felt free and believed that the harasser would no longer bother her. However, her relief was premature. Less than a month later, she began receiving messages from unknown numbers, in which Lewis first pleaded and then demanded she retract her statement and remove the restraining order, as he believed it interfered with their romantic relationship. After receiving several messages, Mano immediately went to the police, as her pursuer had violated the restraining order, and now he had to face the consequences. The man was fined and warned that further violations would lead to much more severe measures, and if he did not leave the young woman alone, he could end up in jail. After this, Sacco did not make his presence known for almost 2 months, and the young woman decided that he had finally left her alone. Fateful photo with a new boyfriend in September 2020. Celeste met a young man named Chris Riedsdale. He was just a year older than her, and they quickly found they had many common interests, views on life and goals, so a romantic relationship soon developed between them. She told her new boyfriend about the harassment from her former admirer and confessed that although he had not made himself known for over a month, she still felt a sense of anxiety. Chris endeavored to surround his girlfriend with care and attention, doing everything to make her feel safe and worry-free. In early November, the young woman invited her new boyfriend to a family dinner to introduce him to her parents and brother. Celeste's choice was well received by her family. They immediately got along well, and her mother even joked that her girl was now in safe hands that would protect her. The next few weeks again passed peacefully, and the former admirer no longer appeared or tried to contact Mano. The young woman was happy, spending all her free time with Chris, and it seemed she no longer worried about Lewis potentially bursting back into her life or harming her in any way. On November 15, 2020, the love-struck couple went out on a date. They sat in a cafe, enjoying each other's company, when the young woman suggested capturing the moment by taking a selfie. The photo turned out very romantic. The couple was sitting at the same table, embracing, smiling, and looking very happy. Celeste liked this frame so much that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. In doing so, she also wanted to share news of her new relationship and signal that things were serious. Chris also posted the photo on his page, accompanied by a touching caption about how he loves this girl and would do everything to keep her eyes sparkling with happiness, as in this picture. Unfortunately, this outing turned out to be the last for the couple. The tragic incident on the evening of their last date. Chris dropped Celeste off at her home, and they said goodbye, planning to meet the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen with her mother, talking about her boyfriend, before heading to bed since she had to get up early for work the next morning. On Monday, November 16, 2020, around 4 in the morning, Eggy was awakened by the sound of breaking glass, but she didn't immediately understand what was happening. Then, suspicious noises, banging, screams, and commotion followed. At first, it seemed to her that the noises were coming from the street, but she then realized they were inside the house. Eggy jumped out of bed, threw on her robe, and rushed to her daughter's room. She flung open the door and saw in the dim light someone literally jumping away from Celeste's escaping through the broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. Her daughter was lying in a pool of her own blood, covered in cuts and small shards of broken glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, gasping for air, her eyes wide open and staring upward. Her mother immediately called emergency services and tried to stem the deep, bleeding wounds on her daughter's body until the paramedics arrived. Unfortunately, it was too late to save her. By the time the police and doctors arrived, she had passed away. The medical examiners later found over 20 penetrating stab wounds on her body, with the fatal blow to her heart. Investigation and the prime suspect analyzing the situation and comparing the scene of the incident with Eggy's testimony. The police concluded that the assailant took less than 3 minutes to break into the victim's room through the window and carried out the attack before her mother entered. The suspect used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, and Celeste tried to defend herself, as indicated by numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if her daughter had any enemies, Eggy could only recall one name, Louis Sacco, who had obsessively pursued the young woman for over a year, harassing her with calls and threatening messages. This information was corroborated by other family members, as well as her friends and colleagues. At the scene, the suspect left a large number of bloody fingerprints, and DNA was found on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, as he had injured his hand. It was imperative to detain and interrogate Louis immediately as the prime suspect in the case, and to verify and compare all the evidence and witness statements. Sacco was arrested the same day, but initially, he vehemently denied his involvement in the incident, insisting that he loved Celeste and would never harm her. However, soon after, forensic results confirmed that the bloody fingerprints found in the victim's room and on the fence were his. Law enforcement also pointed to the restraining order against approaching the young woman, which he had violated. Additionally, on the evening before the tragedy, it turned out that Louis had purchased a hammer and a large knife at a local hardware store, captured on surveillance camera at the checkout while paying for his purchases. He later used the hammer to break into the house through the window, and the knife to fatally attack the unfortunate woman. Calculated criminal or a man in need of treatment. The evidence against Sacco was irrefutable, further underscored by his long-term surveillance of the victim, knowing virtually everything about her. However, the final trigger for him was a photo the young woman posted on social media with her new boyfriend. After this, he went to a store, purchased a knife and a hammer, and under the cover of night, went to Celeste's home to end her life. His actions were seen as deliberate, premeditated criminal activity, yet Louis's behavior was quite erratic, raising doubts about his mental stability. Notably, the man, nearly 39 years old, had never married, continued to live with his parents, had almost no friends, and never held a job for long. People described him as nervous and introverted with severe socialization issues. Additionally, Sacco had a biological brother who was serving a lengthy sentence for a criminal act at that time. A forensic psychiatric evaluation was ordered for the accused, and his attorney insisted that his client needed not imprisonment, but specialized treatment, as he required professional help. This argument outraged and infuriated the victim's family, who feared that the cruel criminal might evade punishment. Psychiatric experts, after interviewing Louis and analyzing his behavior, concluded that he did indeed suffer from some mental disorders. However, at the time of the crime, he was fully aware of his actions. Moreover, he had prepared for the crime in advance, planning the details. This meant that Sacco, despite his attempts to feign insanity, would undoubtedly have to face trial. The trial and sentencing, it was not until the autumn of 2023, 3 years after the tragic end of the young woman, that the criminal finally appeared in court. During this time, he repeatedly tried to prove that he was mentally ill and therefore could not be convicted of deliberate criminal activity. He spent most of this period in a psychiatric clinic. In the courtroom, Louis behaved calmly and detachedly, seemingly uninterested in the proceedings around him. He admitted his guilt, but insisted that he had not intended to end the girl's life, merely to win her love. However, the jury unanimously found Sacco guilty on all counts. The defendant was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no sooner than after 30 years. Celeste's law, which was never passed. Celeste's parents repeatedly pointed out that their daughter had contacted the police as early as 2020, hoping for protection from Louis. However, her complaint was not accepted because, according to the existing legislation, only attempts to physically contact the victim were considered harassment, while online stalking and phone harassment were not criminally punishable. Throughout the 3 years of preparing for the trial, the mother of the deceased young woman, together with professional lawyers and some activist organizations, worked on developing Celeste's law, which would have introduced criminal liability for stalking on social networks through text messages and emails. E.G. DeMoro believed that this would help protect many women and girls and prevent the tragic fate that befell her daughter. She aimed to achieve significant changes in the existing criminal legislation and directly approached the Legislative Commission of Victoria. The woman developed over 40 recommendations and amendments, but almost all of them were ultimately rejected. Investigations showed that in the vast majority of cases, online stalkers limit themselves to their invisible presence and do not seek to contact their victim in any other way. The amendments that were made only helped to limit access to confidential information on social networks. And in cases of severe stalking involving threats, a restraining order could be issued, similar to if the person were pursued in real life. However, there was still no criminal liability for such crimes. Currently, for such actions, a stalker might only receive a verbal warning, and upon repeated violations, they might be fined, though not always. Celeste's law has yet to be enacted. Story 4. A horrifying tale of a woman's revenge. It's said that a humiliated and insulted woman is capable of anything, with the most terrifying in this list being revenge, cruel, ingenious, and sometimes unpredictable. Much in this regard depends on the lady's level of sanity, but one must not overlook the depth of her hurt. This destructive emotion can be carefully hidden within a woman for years, but if it erupts, it will sweep away everything in its path. The story of the Bobbitt spouses in the early 90s shook the world, and their surname became a byword, spawning the verb to bobbit, which means to cut or to chop. This case drew heightened public attention not just to the issues of domestic violence, but also to such a delicate subject as marital assault, which many tried to sidestep. Let's delve into everything step by step. Who is Lorena Bobbitt? Lorena Leonor Bobbitt, born Gallo, was born on May 15, 1970, in the town of Bucay, located in eastern Guayas, Ecuador, near the province of Chimborazo. She was the youngest child in a simple and very modest family. When she was in elementary school, her family moved to Venezuela and settled in Caracas. Lorena grew up quite clever. She performed well in school, was diligent and goal-orientated. In her teenage years, she lost her father, and her relationship with her mother, Elvia Gallo, was quite strained. As soon as she graduated from school, she decided to move to the United States to live with her paternal cousin, Yana Basutti. Her relative gladly took her in and helped her with the paperwork for a student visa. However, she was a very conservative woman, so Lorena, living in her house, had to abide by a strict set of rules, just like Yana's own children, and also take on some of the household duties. Despite everything, the young woman decided to stay in the U.S., as she realized that it offered her far more opportunities than Latin America. She had long been attracted to the beauty industry, so Gallo decided to train as a manicurist. Moreover, Basutti owned her own beauty salon, located in the city center, had extensive experience in the field, and was eager to help her niece learn the profession by allowing her to observe the work of the specialists and practice on her own. Later, her aunt arranged for her to work part-time in her salon. Meeting John Bobbitt about 8 months after she moved to the new country, the young woman had settled in, enrolled in college, and was working as a manicurist in her relative's salon while gradually saving money. In September 1988, Lorena was preparing to go to a party with several of her friends. Her aunt gave her strict instructions on how to behave and what time she needed to be home, and she promised that everything would be fine. The modest young beauty was nervous, as it was her first time preparing to go to a nightlife establishment so late at night. She chose a relatively modest outfit, unlike her friends, applied makeup, and styled her hair fashionably. Upon arriving at the nightclub, she was struck by the carefree and festive atmosphere inside. The venue was filled with young people dancing, having fun and socializing, and Lorena couldn't help but think that such a place might be where she could meet the man of her dreams. This thought proved to be prophetic. A few minutes later, she noticed a very attractive young man intently looking at her and smiling. He waved at her and she waved back. Then the young man approached her and introduced himself. He was John Bobbitt, and he could not take his eyes off the young beauty with the quite exotic appearance. The guy was handsome, tall, and charismatic. He cracked jokes and skillfully paid compliments, so she couldn't resist his charm. They spent the evening dancing and chatting, and afterwards, the new acquaintance walked Lorena to her aunt's home. As they said goodbye, he asked for her home phone number and promised to call soon. Who is John Bobbitt? John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 24, 1967, in Buffalo, in the northwestern part of New York State. He was the youngest of 3 children in his family. At the age of 3, the boy lost his father, who tragically died, and his mother, unable to cope with the shock, ended up in a psychiatric clinic after a serious nervous breakdown. All 3 children were taken into the care of their religious aunt and uncle, who wanted to help their relatives in this difficult situation. The boy was still very young at the time, but the events that occurred undoubtedly left a mark on his life. The aunt and uncle raised the children with strictness, in accordance with religious canons. They all attended church every Sunday and engaged in charity work, trying to help those around them. John was not an outstanding student, but overall he did fairly well in school. As a teenager, he decided to pursue a future in military service. After undergoing the necessary training and special preparation at a military academy, the young man joined the ranks of the Marines, where he proved himself as a brave, disciplined, and determined young man. However, after a few years, the strict regime and the need to obey in the army began to weigh on him. After leaving the service, with some military experience and skills, he was hired as a security guard at one of the city's popular establishments. But he later changed jobs frequently, not staying long at any. A whirlwind romance and a modest wedding. The day after they met, John, as promised, called Lorena to ask her out on a date. The young couple simply walked through the park, engaging in easy conversation about various topics, and John made it clear that he wanted to continue their relationship. Lorena was not opposed to this, but according to the rules set by her aunt, she had to introduce her boyfriend to her before they could start a serious relationship. John accepted all the conditions, and on the appointed day, he came to dinner at the home of his beloved's relative. Bobbitt was very sweet, courteous, and considerate, yet he made an effort to appear serious. He managed to make a good impression on the strict Jana, and after a serious one-on-one conversation with the young man, the woman allowed her niece to continue seeing John. 6 months after the start of their romantic relationship, the suitor proposed to Lorena, and she accepted. She was overjoyed, having always dreamed of a family, children, and a home of her own. The couple began preparing for the most important event of their lives, and in June 1989, shortly after Gallo turned 19, they made their union official. The wedding celebration was quite modest, as the young couple did not have the money for a lavish ceremony, and they chose to spend their savings on a honeymoon by the warm ocean coast. They were happy, but the only shadow over the celebration was the absence of the bride and groom's parents. Instead, their aunts and uncles came to share the joyous moment with them, and so the fairy tale ends. After the wedding and a delightful honeymoon, the couple moved to Virginia and settled in a quiet and cozy area of the city called Manassas. The first few months of their life together were like a real fairy tale. They enjoyed each other's company, showing mutual tenderness, care, and love. But as the new year of 1990 approached, the situation began to change for the worse. At first, Lorena tried not to pay much attention to some of her young husband's sharp remarks and rudeness, thinking it was just a so-called adjustment period. But one day, when she served cooled soup for dinner, her husband simply threw the plate on the floor and then started yelling at his wife, insulting her and calling her a terrible homemaker. She tried to argue, pointing out that John was to blame since she had called him to the table several times, but he was too engrossed in the TV. In response, he slapped her, and she retaliated in kind. Lorena had always believed that she could stand up for herself and would not let herself be mistreated. But the longer she lived with this man, the more he dominated her, suppressing her will, feelings, and determination to stand up to him. John established his own rules in their home, and he treated his wife as nothing more than an object, constantly criticizing her, physically abusing her, and coercing intimacy even when she was unwilling. Failed motherhood. The young wife naively believed that if they had a child together, her husband would soften and stop his cruel behavior. However, as it turned out, John had no desire to have children. Therefore, when Lorena informed him of her pregnancy in 1992, he became incredibly angry. He demanded that she get an abortion immediately, and they never revisited the subject. Lorena procrastinated for several weeks, hoping her husband would change his mind, but he remained adamant and continued to pressure her to comply. Eventually, he literally forced her to go to the hospital and terminate the pregnancy, which was a tremendous shock to her and took a long time to recover from. In reality, John simply wanted to live for pleasure, unburdened by anything. He did not have a steady job, making ends meet by working as a bouncer in entertainment venues, and if he needed money, he would unashamedly take it from his wife, who worked as a manicurist and highly sought-after makeup artist in a beauty salon. The last straw. Lorena tried not to tell anyone about what was happening at home and not to complain, but her friends and colleagues began to notice changes in her behavior. From a joyful, smiling girl, she turned into a quiet, haunted shadow of her former self. Those around her suspected that all was not well in her family, but they had no idea how serious it was. Her husband's behavior became increasingly controlling. He closely monitored where she went and who she spoke to. At home, she had to follow the rules he set, and intimacy between them occurred only when John wanted it, regardless of Lorena's wishes. The poor girl couldn't share her problems with anyone as she found the situation shameful and humiliating. On June 22, 1993, John, along with his longtime military buddy, decided to go out to an entertainment venue. The men partied and drank until late at night, while Lorena was at home alone. She did not wait up for her husband and went to the bedroom around midnight, soon falling asleep. Around 3 in the morning, a drunk and aroused John returned home. He didn't waste any time and ripped the shirt off his sleeping wife. Lorena hardly understood what was happening when her husband forcefully took advantage of her. She begged him to stop and not to do this, crying, but he was completely indifferent to her pleas and tears. After it was over, John simply collapsed next to her and fell asleep. Lorena, trembling and sobbing, made her way to the kitchen. She poured herself some water and took a few sips to calm down, but then her gaze fell on a stand with large, sharp kitchen knives. Her hand reached out on its own and pulled out a carving knife. Out of her mind, she went back to the bedroom where her husband lay on his back, snoring drunkenly. She grabbed his genitalia with her left hand, squeezed hard, and sharply cut through with the knife, severing a large part of it. John jumped up, screaming in agony, while Lorena simply walked out of the room, went to the garage, and got into her car, speeding away through the deserted nighttime streets of the city. She only came to her senses at an intersection when she saw a red light at the traffic signal. At that moment, she looked at her blood-stained hands and realized that she was still holding the severed part of John's body in her left hand. She rolled down the window and threw the detested piece of flesh out, then continued driving. Lorena headed to the home of a close friend, who was stunned by her nighttime visit and the state she was in. After Lorena told her what had happened, her friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, called the police herself and summoned a medical team to the house where the injured Bobbitt was. Precision surgery throughout this ordeal, John was desperately trying to stop the bleeding by pressing a sheet against his wound. Notably, the groin vein is a major vessel, and its injury nearly always results in death from blood loss. However, John was somewhat fortunate, if one could say that, because a clot had formed, slowing the blood loss significantly. The responding medics arrived in time to transport him to the nearest hospital, where he received immediate medical attention. The question then arose about the whereabouts of the severed part of his genitalia, as it was still possible to reattach it, reattaching it to its original place with restoration of its initial physiological functions. Lorena indicated the approximate area of the road where she had discarded her husband's anatomical fragment, and after an extensive search, the police were able to find it. The amputated organ was cleansed with antiseptic, then placed in a special container with medical ice, and urgently transported to the hospital where the injured party was already being treated. The surgeon who arrived from the state capital was astounded by the complexity of the situation, as he had never encountered such a case before, but he proceeded with the operation anyway. He performed a unique surgery for that time, which lasted more than 9 hours, and was more than successful. Despite the traumatic amputation of the organ, and the fact that it had lain on the road for over an hour, all tissues and vessels were successfully reattached, and the patient quickly began to recover. Public outcry that same night, Lorena was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning, as well as to clarify all the circumstances and motives of her actions. She immediately confessed to everything, and shared her harrowing story that had driven her to such a desperate act. She recounted how 4 years of marriage had turned into a real nightmare for her, with her husband regularly abusing her both emotionally and physically, and forcing intimacy only when he desired. Mrs. Bobbitt also mentioned how, about a year ago, her husband had forced her to terminate a pregnancy, despite her deep desire to have a child, and that abortion had been a traumatizing event for her. Regarding the incident itself, she said she remembered very little of that night and had acted as if she were in a fog. Lorena recounted how her husband had come home drunk and simply taken advantage of her, and although she tried to resist, he ignored her. After the incident, she went to the kitchen for water, and the next thing she remembered was her husband's scream, the roar of the car engine, and the part of his genitalia that she was clutching in her hand as she sat behind the wheel. The case caused a significant stir in the press and was actively covered by the media. Many women, like Lorena, who had suffered from domestic violence, as well as feminist organizations, which were gaining strength and popularity at the time, rallied to her side. In the early 90s, wives who were subjected to emotional and physical abuse by their husbands typically remained silent about their plight. Society was still inclined to blame the victims themselves, suggesting that they provoked conflicts or behaved improperly. It was assumed that a wife should be submissive and obey her husband in everything, and if the husband was dissatisfied and resorted to violence, it was her fault. Intimacy in marriage was considered a duty of the wife, not open to discussion. On the other hand, almost all men sided with John. Many feared that Lorena's act might prove contagious, prompting other women suffering from physical and intimate violence in marriage to also take up knives. According to official statistics, there were several million such women in the country at that time. Trials and sentences of the spouses. 2 parallel court cases began almost simultaneously. Lorena officially charged her husband only with taking advantage of her on that fateful night, although in court she detailed the years of regular abuse and beatings, emotional violence, and humiliations she endured, as well as the abortion she was forced to undergo against her under her husband's coercion. John's testimony was confused. He denied all allegations against him, but much of what Lorena said was corroborated by facts. For instance, it was confirmed that he did not have steady employment or a stable source of income, yet he loved spending time in entertainment venues, often forcibly or deceitfully taking money from his wife to do so. Additionally, Lorena's friends confirmed that they had repeatedly seen bruises and scrapes on her body, and she had been in a depressed state for a long time, though she tried not to complain. The court concluded that the husband had indeed abused his wife both emotionally and physically throughout their marriage, driving her to desperation. However, regarding the charge of intimate violence that occurred on the night of June 23, 1993, there was not enough evidence, and thus John was acquitted. He presented several versions of what happened that evening, and the jury, composed of 9 women and 3 men, found him not guilty in the fall of that year. Lorena's trial began in September 1993. She was charged with inflicting severe bodily harm on her. Her lawyers argued that she acted while suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, caused by the ongoing emotional and physical abuse from her husband. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which confirmed that she acted in a state of distress, unaware of her actions, and therefore could not be held responsible for what she had done. In early January of the following year, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that Lorena could not be held criminally responsible for her actions, as she was in a state of insanity at the time of the offense. However, she was required to undergo a 6-week treatment program at a specialized clinic, after which she was able to return to her previous life. The spouses officially divorced only in 1995, after which Lorena reverted to her maiden name. What became of John later? John remained indignant for a long time that his wife faced no punishment for her actions. He decided to fully capitalize on his sudden notoriety, aiming to extract as much money as possible from such scandalous fame. John founded his own music band called Severed Parts, but the group was short-lived as it failed to garner any public interest. When offered a substantial fee to star in adult films in the late 90s, he did not hesitate to accept. Thus, he appeared in explicit films titled Frankenpenis, a play on Frankenstein, and John Wayne Bobbitt, Uncut. John acted in several more films of a similar genre, but interest in him and his reattached organ quickly waned. For a long time, John was eager to appear on various talk shows and gave interviews extensively, but over the years, such offers became less frequent, and the story gradually faded from memory. John then found work as a bartender in an entertainment venue in Las Vegas, and by his 50s he was struggling to make ends meet by taking jobs as a mover, driver, and pizza delivery man. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft. Regarding his personal life, during the high-profile court case that the entire country followed, journalists discovered that Bobbitt had an illegitimate son named Andrew, born in 1992 to one of his lovers, Beatrice Williams. In 1994, John was brought to trial for assaulting his new girlfriend, Christina Elliott, who worked as a dancer in a nightclub. He spent 15 days in jail for this and received probation. In the early 2000s, John was arrested 3 times for assaulting his then-wife, Joanna Farrell. This time, he was imprisoned for a year for violating his probation. They officially divorced in 2004. What happened to Lorena? Unlike her former husband, Lorena did take pride in her scandalous notoriety and tried to stay out of the limelight. In 1996, she decided to return to her native Ecuador, where her mother, Elvia, was living at the time. However, just 6 months later, Lorena made the news again when her mother accused her of assault. The conflict was resolved without going to court, and the women continued to live together. A year later, Lorena returned to the USA, where she opened her own small beauty salon in Washington. In 2007, she founded a foundation called Lorena's Red Wagon, which focused on helping women who had suffered from domestic violence. Soon after, Lorena agreed to give an interview for the first time in a long time and appeared on CBS News' The Morning Show, where she discussed her life post-incident. She also appeared on the popular Oprah Winfrey talk show. In the mid-2000s, Lorena remarried. Her new husband was a man named Dave Bellinger, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to recall her marriage to Bobbitt at all, and claimed she did not follow his life after their divorce. A meeting 15 years later in 2009, nearly 15 years after their sensational legal battles had ended, the former spouses met face-to-face for the first time on the show. Insider. John apologized to Lorena for the way he had treated her during their marriage, and declared that he still loved her despite everything. Lorena was visibly moved by his and confirmed that every year on Valentine's Day, her ex-husband still sends her flowers and cards. Story 5. Now we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. This amazing country attracts tourists from all over the world with the opportunity to relax on snow-white beaches, as if descended from advertising brochures, to touch almost untouched by man-exotic nature, to taste the unique local cuisine, and of course it is Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car. 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair, touched her plump lips, which like a powerful magnet attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up, but she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom on the floor, in a pool of blood, lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night, but unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She will be 16-year-old Esmeralda Riches. Esmeralda Riches Martinez was born August 23, 2006, in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Eligio Riscasti and Isabel Martinez Riches. She grew up in a complete happy family, had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers and was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher, as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023, was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house. He introduced himself as a teacher and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in Teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding. The walk had to be cut short and she had to be brought back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Riches' death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following the violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. But who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police also sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, and some were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results of the forensic examination, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, A review of the phones of Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, but indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and a few hours later to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Murillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay. Because of the evidence collected against him, the prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Let me remind you that preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person, not as a punishment for a crime he or she has committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her, but no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stops were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily and thinking it was a woman's cycle. The mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to make her fall asleep. It was learned from one of the girl's cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her an audio message in the early morning hours, asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." But unfortunately, the friend listened to the help recording too late. The next day, Esmeralda was found breathless on the floor of her bathroom, completely bloodied. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police and his home was searched a day later, during which the clothes he was wearing that night while out with his female students were seized. His cousin, who was the second man that night, Ruben Murillo, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There are many ambiguities in the investigation into the event. The prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation rather than making new speculations about an event that alarmed the public. The public demanded a quality investigation to find out the real cause of the young girl's death. Many felt that the obvious facts that were on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigation. This involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the very car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, which triggered the bleeding. The car was urgently requested by the authorities, but as it turned out, it was sold in a hurry by John Kelly's wife. The investigation believed that such a hasty sale of the car was a fact of hiding evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Paniagua Pillar. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal-Rijo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Paniagua, who was the new owner of the car was finally inspected. But other than traces of blood that belonged to Esmeralda in the car, no other evidence was found. The court ruling determined that there was not enough evidence to keep J.C. Espinal-Rijo in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months. The prosecutor launched his own investigation and re-interviewed the 3 girls who accompanied Esmeralda, testimony that helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., John Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin Ruben Murillo Martinez went to the home of Esmeralda Riches in La Otra Igüe, with 3 other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. Turned out that originally the whole company was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and changed the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Macau beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer, and returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him, into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but it was noticed by one of the girlfriends. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and of course their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends as well. After a moment without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 when they stopped at a gas station parking lot where, according to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmates said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Rich's blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom at the gas station. They also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m. where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the facts. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that the girl had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized and medics know how to effectively help a person. But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestogen with contraceptive effects. When taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen, this component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher John Kelly was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the El Beneo Public Cemetery. Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her. They described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Rich's life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin Rubiel Murillo Martinez with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1st and 6th, 2024, before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Anamuya Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in Hague. Rubiel Murillo Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Rich's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for John eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict, because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm going to let her out because she's with you." I was innocent that my daughter was with this man, the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, it is their turn to fight for justice. A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents are entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Agree. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle, fear wins, taking precious life. Story 6. It was late at night. The streets were dark and mostly empty. A young woman hurried out the door of her house, leashed her dog, and quickly got behind the wheel of the parked car. The car sped up and disappeared into the city's darkness. For the young runaway, it was the happiest night she had waited for 4 long years. Today, we will visit Lawrence, Kansas, and learn all about the life of this young woman and understand what made that particular night the happiest one for her. So if you're interested in finding out more about what happened, let's start from the beginning and share everything we know. Lawrence is a small town with a population of less than 100,000 people, ranked among the top 10 college towns. It's a wonderful place to live with minimal criminal activity. However, this incident completely disrupted the town's peace. On January 15, 2014, a young man contacted the local police department to report a disturbing suspicious noise at his neighbor's house. Officers were dispatched to the address provided. However, no one answered the door, and the house was empty. They surveyed the surrounding area, and through the glass door in the backyard, they spotted a silhouette resembling a person lying down. Once inside, the police confirmed that it wasn't a mistake. The silhouette indeed turned out to be a person. On the living room floor, they were faced with a horrifying scene. A middle-aged man lay in a pool of dried blood. His hands were bound, and his throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. What was just a routine check turned into a criminal investigation, the motives of which needed to be determined. The identity of the deceased was quickly established. He was a 52-year-old local entrepreneur and owner of a chain of pizza restaurants, Harold Sasko. He was born on September 11, 1961 in Florida, and was the 10th child out of 12 in his family. His relatives described him as a responsible and organized person who was always a leader in everything. Harold worked hard from the age of 14, dreaming of becoming a successful entrepreneur and owning his own business. After studying for about 2 years in college in Oklahoma, Harold worked as an administrator in a chain of pizza restaurants in Texas, where he learned management and was able to save money to achieve his goals. In the 1990s, the Sasko family moved to Kansas. Here, the enterprising Harold opened his own pizzeria. The business was successful, and within a short span of time, Mr. Sasko opened another pizzeria in Topeka and one in Lawrence. But who could have done this to the respectable man? Or could Harold have had a dark side to his personality that warranted what happened to him? Investigators quickly established that Harold Sasko had been living with 19-year-old Sarah McLynn for the last few years. However, she was not found at home and could have been the second victim of a brutal attack by a mysterious criminal. Sarah could have been the last person to see Harold alive, but where did the girl disappear to? In order to find the missing Sarah and uncover the mystery of the relationship between an adult man and a young woman, investigators had to piece together information about the complicated and secretive relationships that had been kept under wraps in the deceased Harold Sasko's home. Sarah Gonzalez McLynn was born in 1994 in Topeka, Kansas. She was a normal child, energetic, cheerful, sweet, and smiling. The girl was interested in everything new and fearlessly tried new hobbies. In her teenage years, she faced harassment from a neighbor, and her mental state was shaken. Sarah was very scared by the harsh behavior of the adult man. She felt helpless. During this time, disputes between her parents became more frequent, which aggravated the situation at home and had a detrimental effect on the girl's state. She had to grow up early to try to understand adult difficulties. But the immature psyche of a teenager did not yield the desired result, and Sarah began to drown her problems in alcohol. But the addiction to drinking did not bring relief, and Sarah, having a nervous breakdown, wanted to end her own life. After the attempt, she was hospitalized, where she underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic for some time. Sarah dreamed of leaving her parents' home, where she was suffocated by the toxic atmosphere, with parents who could not divide their property during the divorce. She started saving money to rent a room and move out. During a period of despair, Sarah met an adult man who calmed her and boosted her confidence. That was Harold. He ran a mentorship program for youth where he met Sarah, who got a job at one of his restaurants. By the age of 16, she was already taking orders at the pizzeria counter and diligently saving money for her dream. During this time, Sarah was quite happy. She left the hated home for a place where she felt needed. She made friends and established a relationship with Harold. In turn, he became a second father to her, providing the love and attention she sorely lacked. One day, in a conversation, Sarah honestly told him about her problems, and they moved him. Harold offered Sarah to move in with him temporarily until she found separate accommodation. Sarah's mother was against it, but the girl was adamant. After enrolling in college, Sarah moved in with her mentor. It was a forced measure, which Sarah believed should not last long. Harold paid for her education. They established a friendly relationship and grew close as father and daughter. And for a long time, that was indeed the case. Interviews with neighbors and witnesses showed that Harold was a pillar of support for Sarah after the difficulties she had experienced in her family. She found refuge with an adult friend. Harold was both a mentor and a friend to her, despite their significant age difference. After Harold Sasko's demise, the police needed to find Sarah McLynn as quickly as possible, as she could be in danger. Blood tests showed that all the blood belonged to the deceased, indicating that Sarah was alive and could indeed have been abducted. During the search, it was discovered that Sarah's biological father had reported her missing much earlier than the news of Harold's demise became known, but the police had been inactive, assuming teenage maximalism and her frequent departures from home. Detectives believed that the young woman might also have been a victim of an attack. Her search continued. However, the investigation considered various theories of the attack and crime. One of them was robbery, During the house inspection, it was found that some valuables and items had been stolen. Closets were partially emptied. Money and weapons owned by Harold were also stolen. There was disorder everywhere. Most of the items had been thrown out of the closets. After compiling lists of the stolen items, it became clear that only Sarah's belongings were missing. Her tablet, phone, and car were found on the parking lot at the house. For the investigators, this confirmed that the young woman had been abducted. Mr. Sasko's dog, Oliver, also disappeared without a trace. But why would the abductor take the dog? The disappearance of the dog puzzled the investigators, and they noted that Harold's car was also missing from the parking lot. The license plate was checked in the database, and the police began actively searching for the car. By tracking all the recordings from the city's surveillance cameras where the car could have been spotted, they managed to determine the direction of the suspected criminal, but the blurred frames did not allow them to identify him. Information about the stolen car with the possible criminal was distributed to nearby posts along the possible routes, but no clarifying information was received. While waiting for information about the car's movement, the investigators did not waste time. They actively questioned Sarah's friends and acquaintances, hoping to get more information about the unusual cohabitation of the young woman and the mature man. At that time, Harold Sasko had been married 3 times but was divorced and lived only with Sarah. The fact that a 19-year-old woman was living with a 52-year-old man as friends was peculiar, but no other information about Sarah and Harold's relationship could be obtained. No one had ever seen them as a couple. Sarah had her own room in Harold's house. Could it be that this mature, well-to-do man really became a second father and mentor to the young lost girl? It really seemed to be the case. Harold Sasko was viewed as a kind and sensitive person and a benefactor. His colleagues also confirmed no closeness between the boss and the employee. The investigation was at a standstill. After a critical 48 hours, Sarah McLynn had still not been found. Investigators were puzzled but continued their search for the young woman. 3 days into the search efforts, an unexpected phone call to Sarah's parents' home turned the detectives' theory upside down. The awaited call was brief. The caller waited for an answer and then hung up silently. The police, anticipating a call from the suspected abductor, managed to trace it quickly. The caller's location was identified as a 24-hour store at a gas station in Bishop, Texas. Immediately heading to the location and reviewing surveillance footage, the police were shocked to recognize a female figure very similar to Sarah. The woman freely entered the store, made purchases, made the call, then left in Harold's car. Could it be possible that Sarah, whom the police were searching for as a victim of abduction, was actually the criminal and had fled, taking her beloved dog with her? On January 25, 2014, rangers in Everglades National Park in Dade County, Florida, found Sarah McLynn sleeping in the parked car with Oliver, Mr. Sasko's dog. Upon searching the car, several knives, an axe, and Harold's pistol were found. On February 1, 2014, after she waived her extradition hearing in Florida, Sarah was transported back to Kansas, where officers placed her in the Douglas County Jail. The car was seized and sent for inspection. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bloodied knife found was the weapon used in Harold Sasko's demise. But what led to such a brutal crime? During Sarah's interrogation, it was revealed that their relationship initially mirrored that of a father and daughter. He took care of her and told everyone she was his stepdaughter, to avoid unnecessary questions. Sasko was aware of Sarah's difficult relationship with her parents. He knew she had been brutally assaulted by a man who had left her with cigarette burn scars. She had tried to end her life, and she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. Harold promised to take care of her, but the supposed sanctuary included unrestricted access to marijuana and alcohol. Cocaine and ecstasy were also available. He charged her rent and she bought her own food. He gradually gained control over everything she did. After living together for about 6 months, Harold confessed his love for her. Sarah rejected him, but he persisted in his advances. Eventually, he demanded intimacy as a condition for her to stay with him. Harold took her salary, claiming it as compensation for what he spent on her upkeep daily. He threatened to sue her if she left. Harold degraded and insulted her daily. One day, Harold told Sarah that she was not attractive enough, and that men preferred women with more voluptuous figures. With such an appearance, he said, she would never find true love and would never be appealing to men. Sarah objected but felt she had no choice. He paid for her to have a nose job and buttock implants. After these surgeries, Sarah's debt to Harold increased by $10,000. Her last paycheck from the pizzeria was $265. He demeaned her and demanded total submission. Out of desperation, Sarah began drinking alcohol and using psychotropic substances when Harold demanded intimacy. If she tried to resist, he would hold her down. Taking advantage of Sarah's weakened state, Harold repeatedly forced himself on her, and she eventually entered into a relationship with him at his insistence. Sarah fell into a state of depression from which she sought to hide under Harold's supposed protection. She became increasingly restrained and withdrawn. She suffered from victim syndrome and was afraid to leave him or tell anyone. She saw only one way out of her moral confinement, ending her partner's life. Sarah confessed that she made the decision 5 days before the act. On January 14th, Harold came home late in the evening and started working on the sound system. At one point, he asked Sarah to bring him a beer. Knowing that if he drank, he would force himself on her, she decided to act. She added crushed sleeping pills to the beer, which she had prepared in advance. After some time, Harold lost consciousness. Sarah tied his ankles and wrists with zip ties. Then she took a hunting knife and inflicted a deep wound on his neck. During the interrogation, Sarah confessed that, at one moment, she reconsidered her decision to take his life. But Harold was already bleeding out, and she felt she had no choice but to finish what she started. With renewed fury, she continued to stab him in the neck with relentless force, nearly decapitating him. Then Sarah took a shower, packed her belongings, and left in Harold's car, taking Oliver, the dog she had cared for. First, she headed to Texas, then to Florida to see the ocean. That's where the Rangers detained her. The trial for the demise of Harold Sasko began on March 5, 2015, at the Douglas County Courthouse. In his opening statement, Prosecutor Charles Branson told the jury that Sarah McLynn had meticulously planned Harold Sasko's end. Lawrence Police Detective Robert Brown testified for the prosecution, showing that before the act, Sarah McLynn had made Google searches using the phrase, vulnerable places on the neck. She confessed to inflicting knife wounds on the victim and then cutting his throat. When the detective asked her why she ended Mr. Sasko's life, she replied, "I wanted someone to die." Because of these words, the trial focused on her ability to form the intent to commit the act. However, in a private meeting with the judge prior to the trial, Prosecutor Charles Branson stated that it would be inappropriate for the jury to hear about Harold Sasko's cruel treatment of Sarah McLynn, and he intentionally omitted this information. He believed that the details of the accusations would be inappropriate at the trial stage because they would merely elicit sympathy for the defendant without any supporting evidence. Branson did not want the years of domestic abuse to become public knowledge. Defense attorney Carl Cornwell agreed with the restrictions on presenting evidence of cruel treatment, which he could have introduced in court. Instead, he tried to convince the jury that Sarah was mentally unstable and unable to fully comprehend her actions. Carl Cornwell argued that Douglas County Judge Paula Martin should send the accused, Sarah McLynn, to a state hospital rather than prison, and if a prison sentence was to be decided, sentence her to 25 years due to her mental illness. However, Prosecutor David Melton criticized the defense's portrayal of Sarah as a victim. He added that a psychological evaluation at Lawrence State Hospital, an impartial entity, showed that McLynn did not meet the criteria for dissociative identity disorder. The district judge reported that she had been found to have borderline personality disorder with antisocial tendencies. The report also stated that Sarah McLynn exaggerated the symptoms of her mental illness. In his courtroom address, the prosecutor added that the crime was not committed by a little sweet girl, but by a methodical and far-sighted criminal who had planned it in advance and intentionally left her mobile phone behind to avoid being tracked. In his closing statement, Prosecutor Melton said that in his legal career, he had never encountered something so reprehensible and brutal as the crime committed against Harold Sasko, and therefore the defendant deserved a sentence ranging from 50 years to life imprisonment. Some crimes are so evil, so horrendous, that they warrant harsher punishment, Melton said. He argued that Sarah could have chosen a different method, such as suffocation, overdose, or poisoning Sasko, but the fact that McLean forcefully penetrated Sasko's carotid artery with a long knife spoke to the horror of the act. Addressing the court, the prosecutor repeatedly emphasized that she chose a knife because she wanted to prolong the experience of the act and likely enjoyed it greatly. After considering the arguments, psychological assessments, requests from relatives, and letters to the court, Martin ultimately decided that there is no evidence to support commitment to a psychiatric facility instead of prison, and that the act was committed in a disgusting, barbaric, and brutal manner. Douglas County Judge Paula Martin sentenced Sarah Gonzalez McLean to 50 years in prison. She must serve at least 50 years before becoming eligible for parole, at which time she will be nearly 70 years old. After the sentencing, Sarah apologized to her own family and Harold Sasko's family. Sarah has appealed the sentence based on the provision of ineffective counsel. In the meantime, the defense lawyers began preparing a clemency petition and uncovered necessary evidence of abuse and the dark side of Harold Sasko that had not been presented to the jury during the trial. It turned out that during the search for Sarah, a significant number of crucial clues were overlooked. After all, the investigation's attention was occupied with investigating a crime against life, not proving domestic abuse. An examination of Harold Sasko's phone confirmed that he had repeatedly shown interest in child-explicit material. He downloaded hundreds of videos to his phone and visited X-rated sites discussing children, teenagers, and zoophilia. At least 20 times, he visited websites where men were or appeared to be intimate with women who seemed to be asleep. The police found a camera and flash drives on a desk in Sasko's bedroom. A detective stated that the images found on the flash drives showed that Sasko and Sarah McLean were just friends who spent time together. The defense attorneys were not allowed to review the files. Sarah was shocked and confused when the evidence of harsh treatment was not presented in court. She did not give up on proving that at the moment of ending her aggressor's life, she saw no other way to save herself. On March 20, 2015, after deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury found Sarah Gonzalez McLean guilty of first-degree premeditated homicide with aggravating circumstances, unaware of the months of harsh treatment that preceded her dreadful crime. Now her lawyers hope to get her out of prison, convincing the governor to pardon her, which is a long-term attempt to correct what they consider an injustice. In 2021, the newly elected district attorney of Douglas County, Susana Valdez, struck a stunning deal. The sentence for Sarah McLean was reduced by half in exchange for waiving the right to appeal. The case of Sarah McLean is one of the most confusing and recurring institutional failures where, in the pursuit of justice, the truth remains sidelined. Currently, Sarah Gonzalez McLean remains incarcerated at the correctional facility in Topeka, Kansas. The earliest she can be released is in 2039, but strangely enough, prison gave Sarah a chance to heal. In her only interview, she admitted that being locked up was the biggest relief for her. She found time to reflect on what had happened. She wrote letters to God, trying to cope with her shame. In prison, she trains Labrador and Golden Retrievers for service in an organization based in Washington, Kansas. Sarah says that the dogs have healed her more than she could have ever imagined. In her statement, Sarah said that since she's been in prison, she's dedicated every day to becoming better, not just for herself, but for her family and society. I will continue to ensure that everything that happened was not in vain, as I am no longer the young woman who felt hopeless and didn't know what to do. At the scene where Harold Sasko's life was ended, the word freedom was written on the wall in blood, a word the investigators initially struggled to decipher. During questioning, Sarah replied that she wrote what she felt after committing the crime. Paradoxically, it was in prison that Sarah Gonzalez McLean found her freedom. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.